And actually the entire world, they say he's the first to go to Russia, the first to go to the Philippines, and the first to go to China from here, his vessels. So he made himself quite a fortune, and they began building a magnificent mansion right on this spot. It was compared to the palaces of Europe when it was completed. The front stretched along Essex Street. It was a central block with two wings, one on each side, and it just went up and up and up to a beautiful cupola at the top of the building. And then when you came to the back of the building, there was a 40-foot wide oval ballroom with floor-to-ceiling mirrors on one side of the ballroom that reflected the floor-to-ceiling French doors that opened onto almost an acre of terraced gardens that went down onto Front Street. And then when you walked down the garden, at the end there was this wonderful balustrade that overlooked the South River and all of the vessels on the South River, and underneath a row of warehouses and shops that Mr. Derby had built into the base of his garden. It was wonderful. My husband said he couldn't get rid of commerce even if he tried. He tried to be a landed gentleman, but he always had to have commerce under his feet. But unfortunately, very sadly, both Mr. and Mrs. Derby died in 1799, just as the building was being completed. It was terribly tragic for Mrs. Derby. She was a crown and shield and very, very proud of this house. She had been almost entirely responsible for the building of it, working with Mr. Samuel McIntyre, the finest architect in Salem, and decorating it with exotic fabrics from all over the world, and some of the finest carvers making furniture for it, as well as beautiful inlaid tables you would see in the dining room. I went to several gatherings, the larger gatherings. I was never an intimate of Mrs. Derby, unfortunately, but she hosted a couple of lovely parties before she died in 1799, and their eldest son inherited the house finally. Unfortunately, Elias Haskett Jr. was never as good a businessman as his father. I'm trying to be kind. He was never as good a businessman as his father. He inherited a great deal of adventurous spirit and not much acumen, unfortunately. And Mr. Derby's estate, which amounted to $1.06 million, my husband tells me, the first $1 million estate that he had ever seen, and I think some say the first in America. It took so long for this estate to be settled that all of the children inherited their money just in time for the embargo to come in. And what was their money in? Shipping. So Mr. Elias Haskett Derby's older children lost much of their wealth in just a brief 2-year space of time. The younger children had their money in trust. And as our economy changed, the younger children's money went into manufacturing. So they actually were able to retain much of their estate. But unfortunately, that meant that Elias Haskett Jr. Lost his money and had to go into bankruptcy, which for us means he retired to a large farm in New Hampshire, which is what one does when one goes bankrupt, and he spent the rest of his days in Derry, New Hampshire. And so the building was actually sold at public auction in 1815. No one in Salem wanted it. It was such a tragedy. We all walked through pretending we did, but no one in Salem wanted this house. It was far too large and far too cumbersome at that time. And so the house was knocked down, and the land ended up in the hands of the city, which is when these shops and small houses were built by one of the Derby descendants. And then also our old town hall was designed by Mr. Samuel McIntyre, and that was these were the places that ended up standing on Mr. Derby's estate. But the old town hall was a lovely place. We could hold parties there as well as the town meeting. So it ended up being a good deal for the city. And we also had a marketplace that was deeded by the Derby family in perpetuity to the town, so that it would remain a marketplace. So let's walk down next to the old town hall.
In fact, I think the market is this evening.
Yes, they are having a market this evening, I think.